We often see the Premier League compared to other domestic leagues across Europe, analysing the level of competition and trends within them. In today's podcast, we are going to be looking at the key differences between La Liga and the Premier League, financially, tactically, and culturally. Tomás Hill Lopez Manchero joins me again from The Athletic. Massive thank you to The Athletic. You guys are amazing. It is the place I go to when I want to know more about football. So, Tomás, thank you, mate, for joining me once again. We've done a podcast on Barcelona and how La Masia has been so crucial and how they've been saved from the financial ruins they found themselves in. Or have they? You'd have to listen to that to find out. But the fact that I've got you here, I thought it was worth having a little look at the differences between La Liga and the Premier League, because, again, total transparency, I don't really know another way. We were going to do this like La Liga versus Premier League combined 11, and then I thought about it and I wanted to vomit because I just thought I've got no problem with hypothetical ideas, but I just thought, the differences. I can't even begin to think the differences with the two leagues. And then I thought, what's a better conversation here? So you have put together your sort of La Liga team kind of the season. And we've got a bit of a Premier League one as well, but don't hold me to it, okay? But from that, I just thought it might lead to more interesting talking points with a smart person. So that's what we're trying to do here. So the place to start here, I think, is, those broad differences between La Liga and the Premier League. Let's start off with the financial differences, because I think it is quite a strong starting point, right? So in 2023, the financial year, Premier League clubs reported revenue of just over 5.9 billion. La Liga brought in 3.2 billion. So when ranking the top 20 teams in Europe on wage bills in 2024-25, only Real Madrid in first. 3 cheers for Real Madrid, well done. Barcelona in 8th and Atletico Madrid in 11th are in the top 20. The fourth highest wage bill in La Liga comes from Athletic Club, who rarely spend money on fees due to their Basque policy, and they come in at number 35 in Europe's highest wage bills. Meanwhile, in the Premier League, Man City in 3rd, Man United are 4th, Arsenal 5th, Chelsea 7th, Liverpool 9th, Aston Villa 12th, Tottenham 13th, Newcastle 14th, West Ham 17th are all inside the top 20. So over the last sort of 5 or so years, there's been a real clamping down on the money being spent in La Liga. Can you explain that to me a little bit? Because obviously the ripple effect of that is the wage bill. Most teams in most leagues, a huge amount of their revenue then goes out the door in wage bills. Just have a look at the Championship. Generally, most teams are spending close to 100% of their money earned on that. So what's been the state of play with La Liga? What's kind of changed over the last decade or whatever period you want to put?
Well, obviously what everyone comes back to, right, is the Ronaldo Messi era. I think that's going to be forever, really, the high point of La Liga. Having said that,
why would you say that?
Well, you got the two best players in the history of football, arguably.
Winning Ballon d'Ors,
and certainly, and kind of global appeal for the league as well. I mean, here it was being shown on Revista de la Liga, Sky Sports, which people of my age, I think, still have fond memories of. But then it's also true that 10 years ago, a lot of Spanish clubs across the board were kind of facing financial ruin, difficulties. Tebas comes in as league president and wants to make a more sustainable league, which I think is, an admirable goal. The problem being that Barca and Madrid was so far ahead at that point in terms of revenues that I think it's been hard. I'm not sure the other teams will ever catch up. I think that's difficult. But yeah, broadly,
that initial distance, was that down to often television money is a big part of all of this? Am I right in saying that the reason those two kind of were so far ahead was because their television rights weren't done as a whole La Liga package, whereas the Premier League is? Is that right?
Yeah, which has since changed. But as I say, that almost in kind of correcting that, it's hard to correct that, right? Because already they're so far ahead. I think there's also just the fact that they're just two massive institutions. Like that's hard, really. I think La Liga are in that difficult position of those two being two of the biggest clubs in the world, and yet also being sometimes at loggerheads with the league itself. The salary cap that you're mentioning, the kind of economic controls, that's introduced by Tebas to make it a kind of more level playing field, to ensure as well that clubs are spending within their means. So it's this La Liga imposed salary limit for the whole of the squad. Clubs decide whether or not it's for, players' wages or transfer fees. It takes into account things like revenues, expenditure. It's basically, so that you're spending within your means. That doesn't mean that all clubs do it, because Barca, we've seen in recent years, haven't at times. But as a result, they're clamped down on. It's more difficult for them to make signings. It's more difficult for them to register signings. This is one of the key things that's kind of been thrown into question by this latest Dani Olmo ruling and all that. So
for anyone who doesn't know about the Dani Olmo ruling, what can you explain that?
Yeah, where to begin?
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Basically, Barca signed Olmo from Leipzig from around 60 million last summer. Because they're spending above their La Liga imposed salary limit, they have to offload other players' salaries before they can register him and effectively use him as a player.
Right, and one thing that's really important for everyone to know is that basically La Liga tells you what you've got to spend. It's that way round. So Lionel Messi, the reason why he left, right, was because they looked. You have to give up your accounts. You have to show your the money you're bringing in, the money that's going out, and then from there, La Liga will go, right, you've got this amount of money, headroom, whatever it is, to spend, and that is why Lionel Messi had to go, because they couldn't legitimately afford to sort of give him the wages that he should be getting. Is that right?
And I mean, Barca were in a terrible financial state as well. I think that's what it ultimately comes down to. But
because I think that's also an interesting talking point, this idea that because you can find the money, should you be allowed to spend the money?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think that's a big thing here when it comes to Barcelona and Real Madrid, and probably the frustration there is that a team that's a sort of mid-table or smaller club, they really do need to spend within their means, because they don't have the levers to get them out of trouble. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I think what will frustrate those top teams a lot of the time, and some Newcastle fans might feel this as well, or other teams, of course, as well, that they go, well, yeah, but we've got. I know it's miles over our wage, but we've got it. So it's kind of like, and then from there, you then have an idea of like the integrity of the game, the ability for to have an element of competitive equality, for want of a better phrase, and that is something that Tebas is trying to do. And does he have wholehearted backing from the rest of the league? Because obviously he is the figurehead, but it's not just, he has to get some buy-in, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the financial controls are definitely supported by, most clubs probably that aren't Madrid and Barca. There's this big deal they signed with CVC Partners, this private equity firm, which has led to a lot of improvement to other, I suppose more, La Liga clubs that aren't Barca, Madrid. I think Athletic Club as well didn't sign up to that deal. So there's definitely been improvement while he's been in charge. I think competitively, the league has suffered from not having Ronaldo and Messi, but then that was such an amazing period anyway for football, right? That you're never going to be able to replicate that. And I guess the hope is now that Madrid with their Galacticos, Mbappe, Vinicius, Bellingham, Barca with Yamal, Kubasi, these La Masia players, that's going to usher in a new, era of interest in Spanish football, which I think had waned a bit in the UK, at least, for sure.
Do the wages that even smaller English sides can offer comparatively to La Liga sides influence the quality of the mid-table, bottom half clubs in each league? As someone who kind of, you experience Premier League to a point, and obviously are ingrained in La Liga, how do you feel about that? Like, say someone like a name that comes into my mind is Dean Huijsen, who I know is probably kind of not exploded, but has been just so impressive. And now Real Madrid, it looks like Real Madrid are going to go and get him. The idea that would occur, that Bournemouth, I'm not digging out Bournemouth, but the size of a club like Bournemouth would be able to take a player from Juventus, wasn't it? And then that's the stepping stone is in that direction. The traffic is in that direction as opposed to him kind of going elsewhere or mid-table La Liga teams being able to kind of compete in terms of bringing in those players. That doesn't seem to be. I'm not seeing the cash changing hands a lot when it comes to that. And is that affecting those middle teams?
Yeah, I think it's the spending power, really, isn't it? Because each and every summer, Premier League teams far outspend their La Liga counterparts. I mean, I was looking at the example of Forest, who finished 17th last season. I think they spent more than 100 million last summer, right? Rayo Vallecano, same position. They only bring in loans and free transfers. And maybe there is maybe a positive there because Rayo actually are doing pretty well under Inigo Perez, and they're ninth, clever coaching, so maybe that's important. But certainly, yeah, in terms of bringing in star players, that is tough, I think, for sides at the bottom of La Liga in the bottom half, even outside of the European places, really, because that it probably does come down in some small part to the economic controls. It's a bit more difficult. I mean, Barca aren't the only team to have had problems with registering players in the past. Betis as well have suffered that. Clubs lower down the leagues as well. So it probably does come into it.
From your conversations with people over in Spain or your correspondents, whoever it may be, is there not sneering, but is there a smile, a wry smile in terms of like the sort of cash rich Premier League and how they will stupidly spend money, or the fact that you can get more money from those guys?
Yeah, I suppose it's true. Well, Tebas himself, I think, refers to the fact that the Premier League he doesn't see as a sustainable league. That's kind of what he's trying to avoid in the pure sense of clubs being driven to the wall basically across the leagues. And yeah, I suppose there is a bit of a sense that a Premier League side might shell out a lot for your top striker. Like La Liga clubs, again, they need that money as well to be able to balance the books.
Yeah. Let's talk about the tactical differences between the two, because I think this is an interesting conversation in the sense that I think the globalization of football is becoming more and more easily seen. And but with that, you can see certain like individual wrinkles and differences with certain teams. What would you suggest are the sort of tactical differences between the two leagues, in your opinion, or is there any more?
No, yeah, I think there definitely are. It's a different pace of game. I would say that Premier League games in general tend to be faster. To be honest, that's why we were just talking about Hansi Flick's Barca, but that's why they stand out so much, is they are a more fast-paced, more aggressive version of Barca than we've seen in a long, long time. I think the days when it was all, kind of tiki-taka, possession-based football, that's long gone as well. My colleague Mark Carey wrote a really good article on the differences between the top 5 European leagues, and actually it's a lot more no nonsense in La Liga than you would expect.
Yeah.
It's a lot more long goal kicks. It's far less playing out from the back. There obviously are those kind of teams, but actually it's changed a lot, and I think that probably does reflect a bit the disparity between Madrid and Barca, Atletico to a lesser extent, and the rest of the league.
Because I think it's getting to a point where you have to kind of go towards percentage football to kind of stay within the game. That's interesting. So from what we've seen, and an amazing article with Mark Carey, who's going to come on the podcast actually next week. See, I'm really tapping up the Athletic. There is a suggestion that it is a slower pace. Do you think that comes down to out of possession intensity and pressing, or the Spanish brand of lots of passing? I think when I think of a Spanish team, you think of you do think of that kind of tiki-taka style. Do you think that's like overall still those 5'9" little lads? Is that still the mainstay of La Liga, or of a lot of players within La Liga? Still got that identity?
Yeah, I'm not so sure, because I think for the top teams, certainly you're maybe allowed to play that way a bit more. But if you're lower down the table, you're going to get what kind of 40% possession against Real Madrid, Barca, if that. You can't necessarily play that way. There are some outliers, but actually in recent years, I think it's the more kind of the fast paced or the counter attacking, which is style of play, which has really like stood out among the La Liga teams. I'm thinking of Rayo Vallecano, for instance, under Iraola now, Inigo Perez. I wouldn't say they're necessarily playing a kind of possession-based style, for instance.
Yeah. Was it right? Were they playing this weekend? Did they have a win, or was it Rafael kind of won or lost 4-0?
I think.
Sorry, I'm putting you under the gun.
No.
I feel like because I think it might have been against Espanyol or Osasuna. It's one or the other. But one of them had 70%.
Yeah, lost 4-0. Lost 4-0.
And they had 70% possession in that game, which I thought was interesting. That that direct style. Getafe is another sort of big example of playing that more kind of direct style of play. Is part of that down to coming back to the sort of the transfers of it? Is it? Do you think it's a league that has more Spanish influence than it did a decade ago, or when it comes to the transfers and finding other players in different leagues? Is it one where they're looking further afield to different players and different profiles, and that is going to lead to playing a different style?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess it's true that clubs, I think, have had to look in slightly different markets maybe than the Premier League because they just can't compete on a financial level. I mean, I'm thinking about Barca's kind of scouting operations. I think in Africa we've seen some interesting players come through Valladolid, signing Juma Bar, who's now part of the City Football Group, but he kind of came out of nowhere in Sierra Leone basically. But I think it is a big Spanish influence because clubs need to turn to their academies and clubs need to maybe turn to lower down the leagues in Spain itself to bring those players in.
That's interesting. So an example of a team that tried to play a bit more of a possession-based approach is Las Palmas. They're averaging 50.1% possession. They rank 10th in La Liga for this metric, similar to Southampton, who tried to play this way early in the season, now find themselves relegated. So it's interesting that maybe there isn't, I guess it's a case-by-case basis. And this is why I think as we pull it apart, it's difficult because I think there's going to be moments you could say that, does a possession-based approach give you a better chance of staying up in La Liga as it does with Southampton, who've obviously struggled this year? But I go to, I was watching Monday Night Football yesterday and Craig Bellamy made some really interesting points. And someone else said it to me as well recently, that going up from the Championship to the Premier League, the biggest thing is the athleticism of every single player.
Yeah.
And so that optically, it will look... you'll look silly trying to play out from the back, but actually it's a deeper thing than that. It's the ability to kill you in transition. It's the ability to press throughout the whole game that's going to lead to you getting tired and you making mistakes. And maybe that slower pace overall is something that maybe allows La Liga teams like by 1 or 2% to have a better chance. But I would suggest that we did a podcast with Nedham a couple of weeks ago talking about how do you stay up? Why can't the teams that have got promoted stay up? I come back to the money. I think that ultimately, for you to have a squad that's good enough to stay up, you have to have Premier League quality players in the sense of technical ability, but physical capability as well. And I think Southampton, and maybe it's an acclimatization thing, I feel like the Leicester side just feels older and leggy. But Southampton, maybe overall, it's a quality in both aspects that's meant that they've not been able to kind of get it done. But at Ipswich, I always keep going to Ipswich. I've expected a bit more from Ipswich last year. I thought they spent a solid amount of money, and I think got a lot of players with a bit of potential. It might be one where they have to kind of go up, fail, go down, go up again, and then they're kind of capable to do a Bournemouth, to do a Fulham, and stay up. But it comes back to the money for me, I think, in terms of teams coming up and staying up, I think, because you do need to spend 60, 70, 80 million just to give yourself a chance. The officiating in Spain is more strict. This is interesting. La Liga have more yellow cards per game, 4.9, compared to the Premier League, 3.7. La Liga have more red cards per game, 0.26, compared to the Premier League's 0.12. And La Liga has more fouls per game, 26.4, compared to the Premier League. Why do you think that is?
I think referees definitely clamp down and are more willing to give a yellow card for a challenge that in the Premier League probably would be shrugged off.
Right.
That's a bit of a cliche, I think,
so
over the last 10 years.
Thing,
but I think it probably does. It does play a part. You do see some decisions given which seem a bit strange, I'd say, or that.
As someone who's half English, half Spanish, culturally, how do you deal with that when you're watching that kind of football? Do you get frustrated with that, or are you acclimatized to it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think by now I'm used to it, because I know if I'm watching La Liga, there will be to be honest, a lot more stoppages. I know that certain fouls that would go unpunished in the Premier League are immediately going to be either shown a yellow card or drawn back for a foul, whatever it may be. A lot of clamping down on dissent as well this season. That was a big problem for, Real Madrid were complaining about it earlier in the season. They do like to complain.
Was the Jude Bellingham thing, right?
There was that happened at the beginning of the season. I don't know what the stats are now, but they were already kind of outperforming. It looked like they were going to reach their yellow cards for dissent, rate or whatever quota that they'd had last season. I think that came from a UEFA kind of directive during the Euros about that. As you say, this big debate about whether Bellingham did or did not say F off or F you.
Was it through frustration? But it's interesting that I mean, that's maybe a bit that leads to the overall red cards being a little bit higher in Spanish football. So it seems from the data that there is a real clampdown on dissent in La Liga, as opposed to in England. There's just a broader understanding that players are going to shout, and it'll be interesting to see if that changes over the next few years, because we're kind of seeing it. I kind of like it overall. We're seeing it with. I have this theory called the get up rule. If in your head you go get up, then that's not enough contact, and so that should be employed when it comes to decisions. And I think in the Premier League that happens. But we hear it a lot when it comes to the commentary on a Champions League night, where you go, "That's in the Champions League, that's a penalty." And I think maybe it feels like the reason why the needles moved a little bit in the Champions League is probably because of La Liga.
But I'd say the Champions League is actually closer to the Premier League in terms of officiating.
That's interesting.
Certainly think I've heard. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head now, but managers, possibly Ancelotti, talking about how the officiating in Europe is already different to the officiating in Spain. So it's definitely picked up on that. There are it's different standards of refereeing, really.
Yeah. Let's talk about the gaps between different positions within the league, because a good competition is a squeezed out one, in my opinion. The gap between 4th and 5th is 6 points in La Liga. The gap between 4th and 7th is 11 points. In the Premier League, the gap between 4th and 9th is just 6 points. So there's more teams in the Premier League in the race for Europe. I always think of, there's a website called Soccer Stats, and generally you can find it, and it basically takes the team with the least amount of points and the team with the most amount of points and all the teams in between, and it cuts up the points from, let's say, like 100 to 0, right? And it goes 25, 50, 75, 100. And depending on how many points a team has, they'll go into the 4 quartiles. And a good league, I think generally probably has everyone, it has 5 in each. Is that right? 5, 10, yeah. 5 in each. And there's not a crazy difference. Or ideally, you're like even tighter than that maybe. But you're always going to kind of have gaps. But if you have this one big gap of one of the quartiles, there's a problem, I think. Or if you've got 2 teams, so let's say La Liga, inevitably over the years, there would often be seasons where you have Barcelona and Real Madrid in the first, on their own in that first quartile, and then the next one will be maybe a few more teams. I think this year with the Premier League, what's great is you've got teams 3 to teams 10 kind of all like knocking about together. And I think that's good. And I think that's down to the fact that the Premier League is privileged. The Premier League has that money. The Bournemouth can go buy Evan Nilsson from Porto. Huijsen. They can buy all these exciting players. Fulham can have like these, great players that they can bring. Emil Smith-Rowe, who's not needed anymore, supposedly. All those teams that are mid-table teams are now being able to push into that second quartile, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like maybe La Liga, in terms of the difference in those different teams, how would you say that is kind of sort of squeezed up? Like how many leagues within the league do you think there are?
Possibly 3. I mean, I think it really does come down to, I think it still ends up being a duopoly, like as much as these financial controls have probably made it a slightly more level playing field than it was before and have helped some clubs not reach financial ruin. Barca and Madrid are still streets ahead. I mean, Atletico this season, they actually do spend close to 200 million. They're one of the few Spanish sides who spend a lot last summer and, still have ended up being off the pace in the league. So ultimately it comes down to maybe that big 2, big 3. Then I think you've got a gap to the European chasing sides who are good. These are good teams that, some of them are reaching the latter stages of European competition. And then there's a whole group of sides who have been kind of flirting with the drop at different times this season. Valencia doing much better now under Carlos Corberán, but Sevilla, Valencia, Girona, teams who have previously done well who haven't done that well this season. I'd probably split it into 3.
So to kind of stay with the comparing of the two, I would say Ipswich, Leicester and Southampton, from the points that they've got, you can really see the distance between them and the top 5 sides. Like for them to beat the top 5 sides just feels a bit impossible.
Yeah.
In terms of that kind of comparison of like the teams being able to beat the top guys, Fulham beat Liverpool this weekend. Like that feels incredibly capable for about, I would say, 14, 15 teams, which I think is great. I think it's great for the league. Problem is there's a fall off, right?
Right.
In La Liga, how many teams do you think, it's not an outrageous shock? They can go, not pound for pound, but they can have a little go at the 2 at the top.
Yeah, it is tricky because and to orchestrate a win at, well, not the Camp Nou now, at Montjuic for Barca or at the Bernabeu, you have to stick to a game plan and be so disciplined. Valencia did that at the weekend. I actually do think it's more likely now than even 10 years ago. And I think that probably does come down partly to having Ronaldo and Messi, and just that was such an event whenever they lost, basically.
Right.
But, maybe there is something to be said about how La Liga has changed over the last couple of years and how, teams do beat them. It's, it's not unheard of. I guess it probably does happen a bit less than in the Premier League. I'd like to see the numbers on that. But yeah, it's an interesting